Welcome to The Athlete's Record, where athletes share an honest and inspirational account of their sporting life, the things that matter most to them, and what they learned along the way. Subscribe now for more inspirational stories from the world's greatest athletes. In this episode, we meet Shaka Hislop. Shaka had a distinguished career in football as a goalkeeper in the Premier League, with clubs including Reading, Newcastle United, Portsmouth and West Ham, and represented Trinidad and Tobago at the FIFA World Cup in 2006. It is, however, his achievements off the pitch that have left a lasting legacy as the founding patron and honorary president of the anti-racism charity Show Racism the Red Card. This episode of The Athlete's Record is brought to you by Powerade. Developed with sports scientists, Powerade is a still, isotonic sports drink that helps support effective hydration and replenishes key electrolytes, energy, and fluids that your body loses during exercise.
My wife and I were out in town late one night, and there was a petrol station outside St. James's Park. Needed petrol, so went there, and a group of youths come walking down the hill and started shouting racist abuse at me. As they got a little closer, one of them recognized who I was, and they started to chat my name and wanting to come over photographs. I just got in my car and left as quickly as I could. I mean, it was frightening. It was dehumanizing. But I was in touch with Jed Grabby, Show Racism the Red Card's founder and CEO. He was involved in an organization in the Northeast called Youth Against Racism in Europe, which I had supported. They were in touch just after I joined Newcastle, and I started supporting their work, and Jed and I had become friends. And I was just telling Jed about it, and and he came up with the idea, what about, we start going into schools and talking to kids about your experience, that experience, and your experience in football in general, and you can get teammates to come along with you. And that's kind of where it started. It started with me usually alongside a teammate. His first school visit was John Beresford, the left back from Newcastle at the time. Just going to schools, talking about our experiences in the game and what we've learned, and how we continue to learn playing alongside players from literally all four corners of the earth. From those school visits, the charity just continued to grow and grow to where it is now. So I say that with a real sense of pride as to where we started and where we are now. It really has been it has been phenomenal to witness its growth, to be a part of that growth. We've done a lot of work in the anti-racism space, and the guys who run that organization are doing incredible work. It was founded when I started back when I first joined Newcastle. As I say, I still serve as president to this day. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary in 2021. We are now the largest anti-racism educational charity in the UK. So I have a real sense of pride around that and what it's become, and the role we continue to play in the world today. The pride I felt around representing Trinidad and Tobago at the World Cup was personal. That was about me. The pride I feel around Show Racism the Red Card is about more than me. It's a lot bigger. But I don't think it's right to compare them. But I share. I think it's equal. My pride in each of those are equal yet a little different. I first played in goal at 10. So when they were having trials for that junior national team, I actually went as an outfield player. I fancied myself as a striker. But as I'm walking up to registration, the coach just says, "You're the tallest, you're the goalie." I was only 10 years old. Who was I to disagree? And I made the zonal team as a goalkeeper, went on to make the national team as a goalkeeper. So my fate was decided. It's surreal, especially now looking back on it. At the time, you you take it as it comes. You know, this is a boyhood dream that I had, that most kids like me shared. And when you're in it, you're immersed in it. You know, you're focused on the next game. You're focused on making the best of your abilities, of becoming a better goalkeeper or player. And sharing that space with some of the best that the world have, and feeling that you're justified in being there and being in those dressing rooms, and you have to go out and prove that every single day, whether it's we're talking about on the training ground or on the field of play. You know, that you don't get to sit back and just kind of pat yourself on the back, so to speak. You know, because it's a constant battle. It's a constant battle with yourself and in making yourself the best player that you can be, because the moment you do, or the moment that you don't, somebody else will be right along behind to take that opportunity.
We're still fighting for this title, and he's got to go to Middlesbrough and get something. And I'll tell you, honestly, I will love it if we beat them. Love it.
Managers are under as much pressure as anybody, you know, and I think you saw that with Kevin Keegan play out after the Leeds game to the back end of that season. And then during the course of the next season, I felt that Kevin Keegan was being undermined, you know, and eventually stepped away. Manchester United had floated on the stock market a few years earlier, and then Newcastle would trying to do the same, and they were putting corporate pressures, let's put it that way, on Kevin Keegan around different aspects of his management, and I thought they undermined him. I thought they undermined him and left him with no choice but to walk away. And I thought that was unfortunate, because the club I thought was on the cusp of really doing great things, and that was a critical blow to it. Especially now, you know, in hindsight and looking back, you know, you always have to hit the post before it goes in, you know, so to speak. You know. Recently, Liverpool threw away a commanding league lead to go on and win the league a couple of seasons ago. They lost in the Champions League final before winning it themselves. Manchester City went through similar near miss before they eventually won their first Premier League title. Was that in the Mancini? Was it Mancini and then Pellegrini? Whichever way. But those are things, you know, that kind of, that lesson is a part of the process. And looking back on it now, you know, that was the time for us to build, not the time for us to kind of take things apart and see what you can build out of that, you know. And as a result, I think the club took 2 huge steps back. In dismissing Kevin Keegan in the way that he did, and you could make the argument that they haven't recovered since. There was never any doubt in my mind that I wanted to represent Trinidad and Tobago. There was never any doubt. My issue came in the form of Jack Warner. Jack Warner and I had a rather unceremonious falling out just after I joined Reading. He tried to have me banned because I didn't want to come back to Trinidad and Tobago to play in the most ridiculous of friendly games, a game that he scheduled November 19th, 1994, 5 years after we lost the US. For some reason, he wanted to play this friendly. It was outside of the FIFA international window. I was the only goalkeeper at Reading. I was playing well. We were in the top 3 in what was then the first division, what is now the championship. So kind of looking at promotion. And I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave to go and play a friendly at this juncture of my career and the season. But he tried to force that. He tried to have me banned, and I swore that I was not going to represent Trinidad and Tobago while Jack Warner was still in power. I would not. But again, I always harbored those dreams, those ambitions to represent Trinidad and Tobago. I was called in to an England squad when I was playing at Newcastle by Glenn Hoddle, was the England national coach at the time. Kevin Keegan then called me in for some qualifiers. That would have been for the summer of 1999, just after I ended my first year after joining West Ham. But I got called back into the Trinidad and Tobago squad by Bertil Sinclair, the Tobagonian who was actually the junior coach when I first played at under 12 level that we were talking about earlier. Bertil was the coach back then at under 12, and I did then and still do now regard Bertil as somewhat of a football father to me. And once Bertil asked me to come back and I spoke with him, that was all I needed. And probably he was the only person who could kind of get me to dismiss this grievance that I had with Jack Warner and come back to play for the national team. But he knew how I felt about Jack Warner. He understood why I felt that way, and that what I was doing was because of him. Was an ode to Bertil. Once Bertil got the job, once Bertil spoke to me, then my decision was made then, and there was no turning back.
Trying to be patient, Ibrahimovic. My last little cup of Wilhelmsen. It's a really good save by Shaka Hislop.
Well, easily the greatest day, my fondest memory, June 10th, 2006, represented Trinidad and Tobago at our first ever World Cup game. I'm a Trinidad and Tobago football fan first. I was a student at college in November 1989 when we lost at home to the United States, when a draw would have seen us qualify for Italy 1990. But we lost to the US. I was in the US. I felt that hurt as a football fan. Never thought I'd represent Trinidad and Tobago at the highest level, let alone represent Trinidad and Tobago at a World Cup. Never thought I'd see Trinidad and Tobago at a World Cup as a fan. And then here I was on my anniversary, as it would happen, my 11th anniversary, June 10th in 2006, playing Trinidad and Tobago's first ever game at the World Cup level. And then going on to keep a clean sheet was the icing on the cake. But just hearing our anthem on that day, there's no replicating, no beating that. I often describe the Sweden game and that whole World Cup experience as my fairy tale. I don't go back. I haven't gone back to look at the games because it still seems so surreal. I'm just a young kid who grew up in a corner in Trinidad and Tobago and kind of recognized so many different aspects to the things that all kids talk about, running around their local playgrounds, and pulling on the shirt for Trinidad and Tobago. It's exhilarating, it's pressure filled, as I mentioned before, because you're representing a country, your identity is so closely tied to it, your family's identity is so closely tied to it. It was the most incredible of honors. Enjoy every single moment, enjoy the ups and the downs. You look back on a career with a sense of fulfillment, even when things didn't go well, if you've given of your all. And also, don't forget your grounding. Don't forget where you're from. And I say that because I have always found, and still to this day, I find such peace in going back to Trinidad and Tobago, in recognizing who I represent and the pride that people feel through me and what I was able to do. And when you play professional sport, especially a sport like this, there is a lot of noise. There are people praising you, there are people being very critical. There's fans, there's media, there's a lot to take in, to digest. But then there's a simplicity in going back to where you call home, seeing the people that you grew up with, and recognizing the pride that they feel in your accomplishments. I think that is a grounding that every player needs, especially those of us from the Caribbean. My biggest regret, but also greatest example, and similarly a source of pride, is my dad actually never saw me play for Trinidad and Tobago. So once, not that my dad is still alive, but once Jack Warner tried to have me banned, my dad is a lawyer. He challenged Jack. He took a real exception to it for obvious reasons, and started challenging a lot about Jack Warner and who he was and what he represented in Trinidad and Tobago and our football. And his simple sentiment was he's not going to pay for a ticket. He's not going to support Trinidad and Tobago football while Jack Warner was involved, even if his son was on the field. So my mum would always come, and so I was always really happy about that, even though I fully understand the pressures of a parent. The pressures. If you think the pressures of a goalkeeper are high, the pressures of a parent of a goalkeeper are infinitely higher. So I knew how tough that had to be on my mom coming to see me play. But I was happy that she was there, and I would always respond to just knowing that she was in the crowd, whether I could see her or not. But at the same time, as I mentioned, with my father not being there, it was an example about making a stand and truly believing in what is right, fighting for what is right. My dad never stopped supporting me. My dad never stopped encouraging me, pushing me to play at every level, pushing me and encouraging me to play for Trinidad and Tobago. But he just refused to support what Jack Warner represented in our football. So every time, as soon as games were over, I would race back home and have a conversation with him about the game, about different things, because he'd sit at home and watch it on television. So that was a good kind of rounding experience, the kind of emotion of right after the game and seeing mother to talk about it, and then going back home, to kind of talk about it in a little bit more depth when things have calmed down a little with my dad. My dad is an incredibly principled man that I think has been a guide to me in so many ways. And I often say I cannot tell my story without telling my dad's. My dad was a part of the Windrush generation and moved to England looking for employment in the early 60s. Him and his friend Desmond Allen were harassed and arrested by the police, and they sued the Metropolitan Police Service and won. They won a record settlement. It was £8,000 at the time. He took his share, his £4,000, enrolled in law school, also went back to Trinidad for the first time since he left, I'm not sure how many years previous, for a 6-week holiday. He just wanted to go see his mom, and during his 6-week holiday met and proposed to my mom. So I tell that because we are talking about a man alongside his best friend, a black man from Trinidad and Tobago, alongside his best friend in the day of no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, took on Scotland Yard and won in the mid-60s. That was unheard of, at the time. But that is my father's story. That is example. That is the principle that I've always looked up to.
This episode of The Athlete's Record is brought to you by Powerade. Developed with sports scientists, Powerade is a still, isotonic sports drink that helps support effective hydration and replenishes key electrolytes, energy, and fluids that your body loses during exercise. The Athlete's Record is produced by Record Media. Subscribe now for more inspirational stories from the world's greatest athletes.